right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Play Pause Rewind, our 44th episode. Been a little bit since we recorded, 2 weeks, I guess. I guess that's our normal time. But how have you been, Niles, in those couple weeks?
Oh, just trucking along. Things are staying busy. I'm trying to stay active and get outside and do things and just respond to every text message I get. It's a lot to keep up with.
Yeah,
these
that's
days.
exhausting in and of itself.
Yeah, too much going on in the world and too much to stay up to date on. But yeah, I mean, I've been good and I'm excited to talk about the film we got on deck for today. But Dylan, what about you? How have you been?
Yeah, pretty good as well. I've been watching a lot of TV recently. We're kind of in a good season for television. So I haven't been to the movie theater in a little bit, except for the film we're talking about today. But yeah, just chilling right now, having a good time. But what we are talking about today is The Woman King, a new film directed by Gina Prince Bythewood and written by Dana Stevens and Maria Bello. Stars Viola Davis, Tuso Mbidu, Lashana Lynch, Sheila Atim, and John Boyega. And the story follows both two characters primarily, both the general and a new recruit to the all-female elite fighting force called the Agoye, the Kingsguard of the African Kingdom of Dahomey. And it also touches on the nation's fight against the Oyo Empire, who subjugates them, and the kingdom's relationship to the slave trade. So, as always, we will do non-spoilers for a couple minutes and then transition into spoiler territory right after that. But Niles, what were your non-spoilery thoughts on The Woman King?
I liked it. I say that a lot on this show. Just like, yeah, I liked it. It was nice. But I did enjoy this film. It's a very interesting narrative, and I appreciate historical narratives as well. They're just always like far more fascinating in many respects, just because it's related to history and it's relevant to the world that we live in today. This movie too, I feel like I could predict, not the entire film, but the major beats along the way, and we'll talk about that later too. But this movie did kind of throw some curveballs in there, and it wasn't exactly what I expected too. I thought this was just going to be about a woman becoming king of a tribe, and I'm glad it wasn't exactly that. I'm glad it was a little bit more creative with that, and that it wasn't just like a solo story of Viola Davis's character. It was like this whole group of people. It wasn't just her. It was like, and the all female fighting force. It was just really really an interesting film overall, I would say. What about you, Dylan? What are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I really liked it a lot. And as you alluded to, it is narratively pretty straightforward. But it's satisfying and it's well made and well crafted. And it's a story about an African kingdom told from the perspective of the people who live in that kingdom. And that is somewhat rare in America. So it's good that we're getting stories like this that are being celebrated. And I really liked it a lot. I thought all the performances were really good. I thought the set design was great. The action was great. Characters were interesting. The fight choreography was fucking sick.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. Yeah.
Yeah. The way the Agoye are able to move and fight was so just fluid and impressive. I don't really have a lot of negative things to say about the movie, and it does touch on both real historical elements as well as fictional elements. For example, King Gezo, John Boyega's character, he was a real person and was king of the Dahomey kingdom from 1818 to 1859. But General Naniska, Viola Davis's character, is entirely fictional, maybe based upon a real person who existed at some point. But so it kind of, in terms of character and narrative, it kind of deals in both fiction and history a little bit. And the nation's relationship to the slave trade is altered for the film, but that's not to say it doesn't touch on the horror of the slave trade and the kingdom's association with it, which we'll talk more about in spoilers, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think, this movie does bring an important historical note to light. And it's one that I think is often overlooked in the classroom when we're being educated on the transatlantic slave trade.
Mhm.
And, it is the fact that African kingdoms at the time participated in it.
Mhm.
It wasn't always just slave traders showed up on shore and kidnapped a bunch of people. It might have that absolutely did happen, but it was a trade. It literally was.
Mhm.
They're trading X for slaves. They're trading whatever they really want for it, and it it is an important thing for everyone to learn about and explore. And I think Dylan, when we left the movie theater, we just watched this yesterday. I definitely felt very reflective
Mhm.
as I was kind of heading home and thinking about it, and um, the historical context and of this film and how it relates to real life today it's it is really powerful.
Mhm.
Even if there are aspects of this film that are fictionalized or anything like that, I think it's still a terrific narrative. And yeah, like it's a great film, and it's something that needs to be shared and explored.
Yeah. And I think it's important to mention because
Hmm.
while African kingdoms and tribes were certainly complicit in the slave trade, they were not the perpetrators of that trade. That was white
Yes.
Europeans and Americans. And also, for those who don't know, slavery has existed in humankind for like forever, but American chattel slavery was uniquely cruel and vicious and dehumanizing. And I wouldn't be shocked if the African kingdoms who were selling members of rival kingdoms into that trade did not grasp the full severity of what it was. Not to let them off the hook or anything, but the slave trade was done by white people primarily. If we did not go to those shores, that trade would not have happened. So it is important to say where the fault lies, I think, firmly, and it is in the hands of Europeans and Americans.
Absolutely.
Just
And
so our position is clear.
yes. Yeah, very clear here. And I think the film also, it does a one of the things that I really liked about this film too was that it really showcased and highlighted a lot of inequalities,
Hmm.
not just between Europeans and Africans at the time, but between genders, female and male.
Hmm.
That is a very big theme in this film, and we'll touch on it later as well.
Yep.
But the literal name of the film is The Woman King. Like
Hmm.
this is a story about these bold female warriors, and even though that they have this heightened status in their
Hmm.
society, they are still burdened with these inequities, these inequalities, and we'll touch on those later too. But
Hmm.
I appreciated how this film wasn't just like ignoring a lot of things. It was trying to face these inequities head
Hmm.
on,
Yeah.
with this with slavery and with yeah, female male dynamics in society. It was powerful.
Yeah. But overall, it's a really engaging movie.
Yes.
It's I did not know what to expect from it because I just saw one trailer and heard it was good, so I bought tickets to go see it. But I think it delivered on everything that it really promised. I think it's engaging and entertaining, great
Hmm.
characters, strong performances. So
Yeah, the acting's great all around. Like there was not like a single person on screen who like pulled me out of the film where I
mhm.
was like, why are they in this film? I think there were certain aspects of the film that like kind of like were a little odd to me, but we'll get into those too. But yeah, overall great film. It was interesting, and it's an important story to at least discuss.
Agreed. Let's hop into spoilers right at the 10-minute mark. Look at that. That's pretty good.
Wow, we're getting
Um,
better at that.
excuse me. Um, yeah. So it follows primarily two main characters, I would say, and then a couple supporting
Mm-hmm.
characters. So we have Naniska, who is the general and eventual woman king, and we have God, what is her? Naui, who is the recruit. And
Mm-hmm.
she her introduction is her basically like pushing away this pretty gross guy who has been chosen to be her husband. And apparently she's been doing that a lot. And so her dad is like, fuck this. I'm taking you to the king and you're going to be in his service now. And so she becomes a recruit to the Goye organization, which is the King's Guard, all female
Mm-hmm.
elite fighting force. And so we follow her throughout her training, and we follow Naniska as she is dealing with leadership of this organization and her relationship to Naui as that becomes revealed. So, any more spoilery general thoughts on the narrative of this movie? How'd you feel about it?
I mean, I like the narrative overall. I think, there were moments of the film where we kind of discussed earlier that were, it felt a little predictable. There were some major beats along the way that I was
Mm-hmm.
expecting, like, oh, they're gonna have like a training montage, and they're gonna have like this moment where they meet the European slavers, and they're gonna have like this other moment where it's like the revolt and they're gonna kill their enemies, and
Mm-hmm.
they're also gonna have this low point in the film. It's they but it came across in a way that I wasn't like, it wasn't too predictable, it wasn't too expected, it was original in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of ways, where it was delivering on this message and it was delivering on these um other ideas throughout the film. I think, the one of the bigger twists in the movie, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, was the reveal that Maui is actually the orphaned daughter of General Naniska.
Yeah.
And I think that was a pretty good reveal overall, and it adds a unique layer of complexity to the film
Mm-hmm.
too, because these women warriors have to be, they can never take a husband, they can't have kids, and then the best warrior of them all, of these female warriors,
Mm-hmm.
had a kid in secret all these years ago.
Well,
And
and she
well,
was raped, in fairness. Like
yes,
it wasn't
she was.
her choice, but um she does mention to her friend, who I'm forgetting the name of that character, but
Hmm.
her friend who helped her hide the baby, that she would not have been able to continue being in the organization if it had been found out, regardless of
Yes.
how that happened. So that is an interesting element. But yeah, did you see it coming? You asked in the notes, like.
No, yeah, I just always like asking those questions, but no, I didn't really see it coming. I think it was a good reveal, and we did mention like the inequalities earlier, and so historically, women have been treated as objects, or these side characters
Mm-hmm.
to men, to these male characters, and the fact that like this that Naniska was you know so abused by these men time after time, and raped. It's it's just kind of, it's a lot to take in. It's kind of tough to
Yeah.
process and deal with. But the fact that like there's some good that kind of came out of that, with her having this daughter who turns into this amazing warrior who's like so selfless, is kind of nice. But it all kind of came from this horrible experience on Naniska's part. But how did you feel about that reveal there, Dylan?
Well, I didn't see it coming initially, but when she sort of freaks out about seeing the bump on Naui's shoulder, I was like, oh, it's gonna tie back somehow, and it's gonna be her
Yeah.
daughter. And I like the twist. I think it worked pretty well overall, and I like the motivation for her hiding the baby, and I like how
Hmm.
she discovers the truth and that it affects them both in different ways, and it builds on their relationship because they already sort of had that uh like rebellious daughter and then mother, like disciplining mother dynamic going throughout the training,
Hmm.
because now he keeps like intentionally standing out and fucking around and like doing shit to draw attention to herself, which is not appreciated
Yeah.
But it it actually does lead to something interesting, which I'll transition to now, I guess. But like, I like that we get a payoff in the big battle sequence to Nowie's little prank earlier in the movie, and
Oh
I didn't
yeah.
wait. The what the prank was went by so quickly in the shot that I didn't understand what was happening at first.
Yeah.
But
Right.
she does say like, "Oh, you don't need guns to like light gunpowder or something along those lines,"
Yeah.
and I loved that and how it's paid off in the battle because while she was being disruptive, she still introduced something of value with her prank.
Hmm.
Like, and then Naniska is acknowledging that without telling her, but by making use of it in combat. And it also shows how strategic Naniska is as a general, that she's able to take this like kid fucking around and use what she learned from that as a weapon against their enemies later on. And that's I mean, kind of how they win that battle. Like they start off by blowing up the enemy camp, scaring all the horses away, lighting a lot of people on fire with these
Yeah.
bombs that they make. Like it's really it's pretty fucking effective how they pull it
Yes.
off. So it's I don't know, just a nice little setup payoff. You want to call those out when they show up. It's a basic writing thing, but a lot of people don't seem to do that
I
in their
know.
stories.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I appreciated. Yeah, it was like the gun on the wall, but it's the gunpowder on the
Yeah,
wall, and then it's some.
Chekhov's gun. Yeah.
Yeah, I love those setups whenever that happens. So yeah, I agree. I
Hmm.
thought that was really neat, and they were both very smart, and it speaks to the intelligence of like everyone, but not just men or women, but
Hmm.
everyone. If you can just pay attention to little details, you can like figure it out and know how to
Yeah.
defeat your enemy. But yeah, I thought that battle sequence, all the battle sequences in general in this film,
Hmm.
I think were really cool. Some of the nighttime ones, I'll say, were a little difficult for me to like follow
Hmm.
entirely, just because it was dark.
Yeah. Well,
But
that's
I
why I
think,
appreciate this battle being in the daytime because
yeah,
it's such a thing in movies, and a lot of it is because of digital VFX. Like it's easier to make them look convincing in a darker scene, um, which is why so many movies end in a battle at night and often in the rain. Other than it
yeah,
looking super dramatic, it's easier to make CGI look good. Um, but this battle was in the daylight. We could clearly see everything that was going on. The choreography was really clean. Um, the
hmm,
only thing that made it difficult for me was that a lot of the Oyo Empire people wore the same color uniforms as the Agoye. Um, and
hmm.
some of the other soldiers on their side. So I got a little confused about who was who. I wish the enemy, the Oyo faction, had worn like a different color other than red. I don't know. But
Yeah,
um,
right.
but that was the only criticism I have of that.
Yeah. No, I thought that it was great choreography all around. And yeah, the action's really neat too. So if you're looking for a fun action movie, this is got what you're looking for. And it's not just like standard, digital production stuff. This is like real people doing real stunts.
Hmm. Impressive stunts too.
Yeah, all that flipping and turning. It was so cool. So
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah. So also just a random fun note. I looked this up.
Mhm.
And apparently the Agoye are apparently part of the inspiration for the Dora Milaje in Marvel's fictional nation of Wakanda.
Wow,
So
yeah.
little fun thing, a part of it. They didn't say they were the inspiration, but kind of makes sense. Elite all female fighting force in an African nation. It was like I'm sure there's some connection here, and there was. So
Yeah. No, that's really
cool.
cool. Yeah, I guess I didn't put that together in my head beforehand. So yeah, that's really cool.
And they both
Um,
wear red. I don't know if that's historically accurate, but
wow, red. No, yeah. While we're talking about that historical inspiration, should we talk about the history associated with this
yeah,
film?
yeah, we probably should. As we mentioned, King Gesso was a real king. He
Hmm.
was, and he served as king for I think about 40 years. It said. But do you want to go through
Hmm.
some of the discrepancies, I guess, that there are between real life and the movie?
Yeah, yeah, because like this film isn't, it's not nonfiction. Obviously, this
Hmm.
is a
Based on
film.
historical events.
Yes,
There's
based on
always a little
historical
asterisk
events.
with that. And of course, this is not the first movie to stray from historical accuracy.
Oh yeah.
Almost every single movie that is based on historical events does that. But this one has some interesting differences, let's say.
Yeah, very much so. Because King Gezo, like you said, he was actually a real king of the Dahomey Kingdom
Mhm.
at the time of this movie, which is about 1823. He served for like about 40 odd years or something like that.
Yeah.
But and the Goje, they were actually real. These were actual real women warriors
Mhm.
that were part of the army for the kingdom. However, there's some fictional embellishments, I guess, of like some aspects of the story, particularly with the transatlantic slave trade.
Mhm.
Um, the Dahomey Kingdom was actually a significant contributor to the slave trade for many years. And Gezo, it's my understanding from like just like poking around on the internet, that Gezo actually didn't really have much interest in ending their participation in the slave trade. Because it was really profitable for them. And
Mhm.
I think in the movie there was like a point where he's talking to the Brazilian trader, and he's like, well, if you're not going to sell people anymore, then you're not going to be as rich as you are right now. And it's like, well,
Mhm.
yes, that's very true. He actually, Gezo didn't actually end the participation in the slave trade until 1853. So that's a whole like, I can't exactly remember when the movie was set. I think it was 1823, I want to say,
Mhm. I
but
think you're right.
it was that's 30 years after this
Mhm.
movie is set. It's like, oh my gosh, that's insane that it would take that long. But one of the main reasons why they stopped was because of pressure from the British Empire, because
Yeah,
they
I want to talk about that a little bit too, because
yeah.
as we always say, history is written by the victor, and
Yes.
the sources we have read that information on, because I read that as well, were probably not written by anyone from the Dahomey Kingdom, and it
Yep.
probably behooves British people and the descendants of British people to say, "Oh, it was us who pushed the end of this slave trade."
Yeah.
So I want to like put an asterisk on that too. It's like our research says that. Is that how it actually happened? We don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And like, yeah, I have a note in here on this document. But yeah, it's just like kind of what you were saying. History is written by the victor, and the bulk of the written content that we have about the Dahomey Kingdom and um, their participation in the slave trade
Mhm.
comes from the colonizers, comes from the
Yeah.
French, comes from the British. It comes from the Europeans, who are always going to try and paint themselves in the best light possible. So
Mhm.
yeah, can we necessarily trust that it was the British who pressured them? Can we trust that Gezo wanted to end the trade but couldn't because of monetary concerns? We can't say for sure at this time, and maybe
Or it
ever.
could have even be threats against his life and the lives of his people. We don't
Yeah.
know. Not that that justifies trading slaves, but a couple other interesting wrinkles too. The
Hmm.
movie really emphasizes that Naniska, who is a fictional character, is pushing for transitioning them away from selling slaves to selling palm oil. Apparently, King Gezo did actually do that for a bit,
Mm.
but moved back to trading slaves because it was more prolific business wise and brought in more money. And also, I read that he did because the movie mentions how his brother was the king before, and how his brother sold Dahomey
Hmm.
people into slavery. And
Oh wow.
based on my research, it is true that Gezo stopped that practice. So he did trade in slaves, but he didn't trade from their kingdom, um,
Gotcha.
which is something. uh,
I
but
guess.
yeah, but from my research, as Naniska was a fictional character, that conflict between whether or not to sell slaves versus palm oil that is introduced in this movie is also at least partially based on fiction. So
Yeah. Well, and it's like it is tough to get in the head of someone who is fictional and maybe never existed, and it's a whole other century, it's a whole other continent, it's a whole other culture, it's a whole other way of life. So it's tough to know how or exactly how someone might feel at that time about the slave trade and
Hmm.
their participation in it. And when I was like doing my research as well, one thing that I found really interesting too was that the Dahomey Kingdom apparently has been described as one of the most heavily involved in warfare and slave trading at the time of this film. So like Dahomey always had a standing army of male soldiers and then also the Agoge. But that wasn't always typical of African countries. Apparently, like when during peacetime they would just kind of disband the armies, and then when they needed to, when there was warfare again, they would bring them all back together. But Dahomey
Okay.
always had a standing army, which is kind of like, oh, that's a little on the nose. That's a little weird. Why you would always need that? And there was also I think it was a Smithsonian article I was reading about
Hmm.
this, but some historians also suspect that due to that heavy presence of an army and militants and all that,
Hmm.
um, it's possible that Dahomey could have even been closer to a totalitarian state. But that's kind of speculation. I'm not really, I'm not really
I
as
mean,
knowledgeable as I'd
it
like
was
about
it
that.
was a monarchy, so that's
It
not.
was, yes.
Yeah, and like monarchies are totalitarian, or
Yeah,
totalitarian. A
and there
militaristic
was,
monarchy for sure. Like
yeah,
I
and
wouldn't
there
doubt
was,
that at all.
yeah, yeah, me too. And then there was such like a clear separation of like, this is the palace, and then this is the rest of the kingdom. It's like,
Mhm.
yeah, that's how they get you.
I thought it was very interesting that the citizens of the kingdom were not allowed to look on the Goya, and
Yeah.
that men were not allowed to pass beyond that like palm veil, I think they called it,
Hmm.
or palm whatever. But there was like they were this very elite and sort of not secretive, but like they were treated as above others, it felt like, and like too like people were not worthy to witness them in their day-to-day movements. um
Yeah.
so
Well, yeah, and I remember looking up some other interesting historical facts. I don't have them written down, but the Agoge were also actually maybe I did write it down, but they were actually also wives of the king.
mhm.
But they wouldn't like go to bed with him or like share his bed or something like that. They were kind of like more like a step below his other wives. So like
Uh-huh.
the Agoge, they couldn't like go seek out sex outside of the marriage. They couldn't
Right.
do these other things. So it's just kind of like another way of controlling them. But like there's a lot of fascinating stuff about these female warriors
Yeah.
in general.
And did you in your research, did it say they were wives of the king or that they were married to the king? Because in the movie it says they were
Mm,
married to the king, and my take on that was like how someone says they're married to their work, like
mm.
like they pledge their service to the king, and as a part of that they are sworn to celibacy. That was my read on it. But in your research it say they were wives as well, or just
I I don't want to say because
okay.
I might get that wrong. So,
Okay.
but I think I think it's pretty similar to either or there, but I know that's not a
Mhm.
great answer.
Yeah.
Um,
But I kind of saw it because he calls them the King's Guard, and
yes.
I wanted to, and they had to be celibate, which reminded me of the King's Guard in Game of Thrones, who are also sworn to
Hmm.
celibacy, and it made me want to know, like, was that a way King's Guards in history traditionally were? And I found a couple examples that where that was the case, but also
Hmm.
googling things about King's Guard brought up almost exclusively Song of Ice and Fire articles. So it was very hard to find anything on that definitively. But I think the celibacy might have just been um like a element of assuming this status in society. That's like you get this high ranking and respected position, and this is what you have to sign up for if you're going to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting stuff. And I think a lot of this stuff about the history of the film too, we'll talk about a little bit more of this in a bit, I think
Hmm.
too. But while the film really paints like this optimistic and, at times maybe exaggerated perspective of, people who were advocating for the end of slavery, or the slave trade.
Hmm.
That might not have always been the case. The reality of the time period was far darker than what's being
Yeah,
presented in this
yeah, of
film.
course.
And, I think that's totally fine too. Like,
Mhm.
I think I would rather watch this film that, has a more, I guess, moralistic high ground, and, a character who's like that we can all relate to and who's advocating for,
Mhm.
this social cause, but it's still also a badass in her own right. Like, I would much rather watch that than like someone who's powerless and can't do
Right.
anything to change the situation.
They make it a satisfying narrative, whereas if they followed the
Yes.
history accurately, it would not have been that. Like the ending of the movie is them basically burning down the slavers' town and freeing all
Yes.
the slaves there. It's like that is a satisfying end to a movie, but as we know from history, slavery was far from over at this point. So the trade continued, and we know that the Dahomey Kingdom was part of that trade for several more decades after the story takes place. But I think, and this is a big part about in general, I think we as audience members need to be more responsible for our own education than
Hmm.
just expecting a fictionalized movie to instruct us on our morality or our history lesson. Like, I think both of us did a lot of research after this and looked into the actual history of the kingdom and their relationship to the slave trade. And we used the movie as a jumping off point to do that. If the movie completely omitted the kingdom's relationship to the slave trade, that would be irresponsible and unethical. But I think, um, and I guess I could see the argument that even portraying them as positively as they did at the end, with the king's willingness to move away from the slave trade, could be argued to be the same. But I don't expect a movie to do my homework for me, so I looked into it afterward and found out the truth. And if people will take that upon themselves, I don't see any problem with a fictionalized version of things. Just like when we talked about in our Top Gun episode, I have no
Yeah.
problem with that like fictionalized, idealized version of the American military existing in movies, so long as we recognize that it's bullshit in real life.
Oh yeah, and like, yeah, we talked about it before too, with like cops and, other
Yeah,
aspects of our society. Like, I am fine with cops as a concept, in
in
real life.
movies.
Yeah, in movies,
Yeah.
in movies, yeah, I'm like, I'm fine with that cop character. But,
Hmm.
if I see a cop on the street, that guy is not my friend, and he's no
No,
one else's friend.
exactly.
He's out to look out for his own
Yeah.
interests.
Cops are a
Um,
violent gang who protect each other, and most recently left a suspect chained in a car on a train track, and she got hit by a moving train. Um,
yeah, I saw that video earlier. Oh my god, that was horrific.
it
Ugh,
is
that someone could do
horrific, but like we were saying, like a cop show is great. That's not how cops are in real life. It's the same thing. It's like you have to be able to separate fact from fiction on these certain things, and it is kind of on
Yes.
you to educate yourself beyond what your entertainment tells you. Like,
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I liked about the Woman King too, was, that it really, we kind of touched on this earlier too. It, didn't really back away from, these difficult issues
mhm.
of like the slave trade, but also gender disparity and inequity as well.
Yeah.
That is definitely like a prevalent theme in this film, and it's something that they come back to time and time again. It's
Mhm.
very clear that there's this separation between men and women in this society.
Yeah.
And, even though these Agoge, they have this kind of elevated status and their renown in their society as these exceptional warriors, they're still not on par with their male counterparts in terms of
Mhm.
like their freedoms. Like, the male soldiers, they could marry, they could have kids, they could do that stuff. The
Mhm.
Goje could not marry, and they had to remain celibate. That's
Right.
like, it's an unfair dynamic, and, it's kind of fucked up. It's something that I'm glad that they
It
talked about, or at least
it
highlighted in the
is.
film.
But I also, and I could be totally wrong on this, but I got the feeling that their celibacy was an element of being part of the King's Guard, and their male soldier
Hmm.
counterparts were not part of the King's Guard. That
I
could have
think
been
so.
my misinterpretation, but I think um the Agoge were elevated to a higher status and I forget which character it is, but talking about like you will have a seat at this table and you will be respected and people will listen to you, but you have to do these things in order to have
Hmm.
that. So I think I don't think the male soldiers had a seat at the council. Um,
Yeah, I think you're right.
like Naniska did, but I think it was trade off of that. And there is still that inequity though, because it's not like they get a choice about can I have a seat at the table and still be able to like marry and have sex. No, you can't. It's one or the other. Um, even
Yeah.
if that sex is non-consensual. So
Hmm.
that was interesting. But I want to talk about just some of the character dynamics too that carry us through the movie, because we had, I would say, four primary ones.
Hmm.
The mentor-mentee relationship between Naui and Igozi, Lashana Lynch's character, which I thought was really great. I enjoyed their back and forth, and
Hmm.
Igozi was a really likable and fun character, and it really like built her up to where it was devastating when she gets killed towards the end, in the jailbreak sequence in the town, which was a really exciting sequence too. Um,
Yeah, I think that was
it,
one of my favorite sequences for sure.
and it really makes you think they're gonna beat the odds and get out of there. Up until Igozi gets shot, and then now he just like breaks. And the entire time watching that, I'm like, you gotta fucking go. Like you gotta run. Stop sitting there crying. You have to go.
I know, yeah.
um,
Yeah, like that was one of them elements of the film that like, or at least her death, that death scene in that moment was kind of one of the few things that I did predict earlier in the
mm,
film. Like as soon as that mentor mentee relationship was established, I'm like, she's gonna die. Like
mm,
I just kind of felt like I called that from a ways away. But yeah, I mean the emotional um uh the emotions in that scene, I guess in general, are really powerful, and
mhm.
they felt like a really do like a strong relationship with each other too. So yeah, I was kind of ashamed to see them go, and um or her go like that.
Yeah. But I also we have the relationship between Naui and Naniska as well. The sort of like extreme frustration at Naui's acting out all the time, but also the respect that comes with that, and then the eventual love between them as mother and daughter. I thought that built
Hmm.
up very well and organically, and it was only strengthened by the plot twist. And then I like the relationship between Naniska and King Gezo as well. There was like there was definitely some boundary pushing there, but they clearly respected each other and like had a strong partnership, uh,
Yeah.
and everything like that. To the point where when Naniska expressly disobeys orders, he does not punish her, but rewards her efforts afterward, because
Hmm.
he recognizes that she saw something he did not, and
Yeah.
she pushed their society forward in a way that he was not able or ready to do. And then the fourth relationship is the one I'm a little bit more iffy on. It was like the pseudo romance between Naui and the
Yeah.
guy.
The
I forget his name,
yeah. Yeah,
but
he doesn't
they
need to have a name.
I am glad that his role was the size it was and not more, because they could
Yep.
have fallen into a very dangerous trap with that character and made him into a white savior type, which I think he was trying to be, but the narrative does not let him have that satisfaction. And I'm glad they don't end up together and that he just leaves. Like,
Me too. Yeah, I was a little concerned when he got introduced and that relationship started to build. I'm like,
mhm.
no, none of that, please. Like,
Yeah, it felt weird. It felt like, and I understand his mother was from this kingdom and he was trying to come home in a sense, but it felt to me like he was sort of uh exotifying them in a way that felt
mm,
uncomfortable. I don't know if that was actually there or it was just me being oversensitive or something, but it felt like they could have easily fucked up with that character and they didn't. So,
yeah, and I was kind of torn a little bit too because I felt like that they were gonna do a whole like kind of you know a story where he just returns to his like people and just never leaves. Like I kind of thought for a second that he was just
mhm.
going to go back to the kingdom Dahomey kingdom with them and just kind of try and become one of the tribe. But I'm glad they didn't take that approach either,
Mhm.
because I think that would have been too much too fast. And this story wasn't really about him. He
No,
was,
it was not.
definitely a side character and just kind of there to um, be like, well, yeah, not all, not all the horrible people that were involved in the slave trade were horrible, but they all participated and they were all
Yeah.
complicit.
Yeah, they were all complicit, and I guess he has his little hero moment at the end where he
Mhm.
lets the captured men loose, and then they just drown his like slaver friend. Like, good job. That's what that guy
Yeah,
deserved. Um, but
100%.
I yeah, I'm glad they didn't fall into the trap of making a big part of the ending about him. They kept him in his
Yes.
own little self-contained thing. Like he did that one good thing, and then he just stood there, and then he
Yeah.
left.
Yeah, I was happy
uh,
about that too. And I think, one thing that I wish they explored a little bit more in this film too, or what could have been more interesting, like it wasn't a big part. So, I think I could go either way on it. But,
mhm.
if there could have been maybe one relationship dynamic to improve upon, it would have been I feel like that I can't remember her name, but the a Goje warrior who kind of goes through the training with Naui, but
Uh-huh.
is from that tribe that like they
Mhm.
basically killed and captured. Like
Right.
I think that would have been interesting to explore that character a little bit more. Like
Mhm.
I don't feel like she gets a lot of screen time, and that's totally okay. But like there's a rich story there that you could really explore.
Mhm.
And there was already so much in this film that I think I understand why they didn't pour too much into it, because there's already
Mhm.
so much ground to cover. So adding in one extra character kind of makes it a little bit more complicated. But
Right.
I think that there was just like a nice well of truth and a story to be explored there, that
Yeah.
they just didn't.
I agree on that, and I also um feel the same exact way as you do about that, about the storyline with the king's newest wife, I think,
Oh
and
yeah.
her rivalry with Naniska. It felt like there was a lot of interesting sort of court interplay there that we didn't really focus on. Like we got
Hmm.
hints of what was going on, like the different motivations of his different wives, maybe, and the different people on that council. But the movie stayed very focused on the warriors instead of that, which is fine. It's just it was like, oh, another interesting element that could be played with that they don't really dive into. But and one, not, I don't even know if it's a critique really, but I wish I had a better understanding of what the position of Woman King is, because they say it's a
Mm.
traditional position of this kingdom, and that they haven't had one for a while. And then Gezo makes Naniska Woman King at the end, but I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I was a little clear on that too. There were some points in the film that they just kind of like introduce something real quick and then move on. Like,
Yeah, because
and that's one of them.
I don't think she becomes one of his wives in that position.
Yeah.
At least that's not my understanding. So I would have liked just a line or two explaining what that position entails in
Yeah.
the broader kingdom. But that's really my only negative, and it is a little one because it doesn't ultimately matter.
I think that there's like, one other thing that about this film I think was the editing that was a
Hmm.
little odd at times too. Like not many moments of the film, but like small things where it was just kind of like, why did they make that decision? Like I think there was like one scene that lasted like 10 seconds or something like that, or 15 seconds, and it's like when the um like they come up to that female warrior who's from the other tribe that they killed
Hmm.
and stuff, and they're like, "You'll never be one of us." And then they're like, "Well, she's actually like, I was like the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
position as her. Like, what are you talking about?" And like, then they move on really quickly from that scene. Like, it
Hmm.
lasts like 15 seconds, and it's like, well, why didn't we linger there longer? Like, why do we need to move on so quickly? And I think that was like one of the things in this movie that like they needed to move really quickly in some
Hmm.
areas.
Yeah. It's definitely a pretty tight narrative, I would say. It doesn't linger on much for too long. And
Hmm.
maybe there were some spots that it rushed over a little bit, but I'm glad they kept the focus where they did. Um,
Me too.
and I loved the sets too. The palace was really a really well realized location, and
Hmm.
it's just really interesting. I was kind of like when they're in the like pool that they have, and she cuts open her shoulder and
Yeah.
bleeds everywhere. I was like, bro, you're getting blood all in the pool. What are you doing?
Dude, come on. You guys don't understand like disease, but come on.
I think, well, they do. They cleaned a lot of wounds and stuff like that. But
Yeah,
I was like, how are they going to get the blood out of the? Does it? It just made me interested
they
too. It's
won't.
like, is there a filtration system in this pool? Like that drains water? I don't know. I was like, stop it. It's
Where's the chlorine? Where
every time in like historical or fantasy settings where like someone is not treating a wound, it distracts me from what's going on because I'm like, what do you do something with that? Like you have to clean that or you're gonna die. And in fantasy, I forget sometimes the rules do not apply and it's fine. But but yeah, I think let's jump out of the story real quick and talk about the real world again, because there was a hashtag going around, hashtag boycott woman king. And so this is, I think, another example of well-intentioned left and leaning liberal people or left and liberal leaning people getting duped by reactionary racists, because the boycott was centered around the fact that the Dahomey Kingdom participated in the slave trade, which is true. But the movie deals with that. It's a very major part of the story.
Yes.
And I saw a lot of the people pushing this on Twitter and online, and they were your usual like right-wing reactionary racists, like the type of people who complain about a black dwarf in the Lord of the Rings show, who were pushing this hashtag. So to me, it really, it doesn't feel like the people who spearheaded this movement actually care about the kingdom's relationship with the slave trade, but they're more interested in seeing a project starring black people financially failing. Not to say that people who genuinely did not feel comfortable with this movie because of the historical truth of this kingdom, I'm not saying that's invalid. That's totally valid if that's how you feel. But you should be aware that the movie does tackle that history a lot. It's a lot of the movie is talking about that. So,
well, yeah, and I think there's definitely some people that probably were displeased with some of the fictional liberties in this film, but the film does not glorify the slave trade or slavery at all. Like it's not. It doesn't make the oppressors seem like heroes or anything like that. Like it condemns it, it vilifies the slave trade, and it just highlights how horrible and just downright evil the whole thing was. But I think it also shines a light and says, a lot of people were involved in it. It wasn't just Europeans, kind of like we were talking about earlier. It's like it's a lot of complicit parties working together to move some people around and make some money, and that's what they're focused on at the end of the day, is the profit. And I think people probably jumped the gun with this hashtag. A lot of people probably like jumped it, and then they were like, we're not going to go see it. But because I think this film does a good job with this story.
Yeah, because the hashtag was trending before the movie had come out, so people making this complaint had not seen the film, which is why I feel like the initial movement was disingenuous and meant to make a project starring black people fail. But like you mentioned, and King Gezo talks about this at the end, it's like things like this can't just happen with the like oppressor enacting it. They have to trick people into advocating against their own best interest and turning on each other. And that's how oppression and violence always happens. It's because the like reactionary powerful people, they are always in the minority at the top, but they maintain their power by turning everybody else against each other, which is where like all the, like you even see it today in America, like all the culture war bullshit. Like the conservatives say some really fucking stupid thing, but they say it enough times to where people who don't know any better and have some prejudices of their own are like, oh my God, this is a huge problem. It's like, well, no, it's not. But now you think it is. So now advocate, now you like fight against other people who look different than you, when you would be better off if you banded with those people and fought against the real, perpetrators. politics again.
Always comes back on this podcast.
Yeah.
We're always talking about politics.
But I
But
mean, it's directly mentioned in the movie. That's what he's talking about. He's like, the
yeah,
Europeans and Americans like convinced us to do this to each other, and that's how they get away with it. And it movie Gesso decides not to do that. Historical Gesso apparently did not. But still, the movie addresses the slave trade and the kingdom's involvement in it pretty thoroughly. So if you were uncomfortable with the movie, thinking it was going to brush that under the rug, it does not do that. So
yeah. Well, and like we said earlier too about history is always written by the victor, and like we said earlier, a lot of the written records that we have about the Dahomey Kingdom come from colonizers, come from white people, come from the worst people you could ever imagine. And so, it is tricky, I think, to craft a nuanced narrative around this situation, and, still shine a light on this historical issue and bring some, a narrative around it for people to watch. So, I think the boycott was disingenuous. It was misguided. Yeah.
But again, we should reiterate, like, if you still feel uncomfortable with the movie, even knowing that is also valid. It's not our place to tell you what to do and what to spend your money on and what to watch. But do you have any other closing thoughts on The Woman King?
I do. I have a few things. So one of the things that I liked about this movie too, I always like to pull out themes if I can. I feel like perseverance and patience really shine through in this film, as some of the themes we already talked about. Inequality and inequities and these other relevant themes. But perseverance is a big thing here. From the combat training and the war training to the slave trade auction where they're being sold. The film really highlights how important it is to just persevere, trust you're doing the right thing, you're making the right steps and putting in the effort to do what's right. Like, I appreciated those themes in this film. So I think it was great, those themes featured in there. And I think kind of circling back to the gender equality conversation that we were having too, I think this film really does serve as a reminder that we all need to continue advocating for equality and being champions for change. I read this one NPR article before we started this episode, which was a review of the movie, and there was a quote in it that I thought was really powerful. And it is, "If we do not continue to speak up about the challenges we face every day, society will never be fair to women." And I think that is something that we all need to just kind of keep in mind as we move forward and help one another towards a more fruitful and prosperous society where we're all equal. Because we still got a lot of work to do. The civil rights movement did not start too long ago. It feels like it was a long time ago, but it really wasn't. So there's still a lot of work to do.
Yep. Cool. Well, I'd fully recommend this movie. I think it's awesome.
Yes.
It's a badass action movie with a setting that we do not see enough of, especially in America. And I think while it maybe makes the kingdom look better than its real life actions, I think it does a valiant attempt to depict the complexities of their history. And I think it's a great movie. I liked it.
100% agree.
Let's jump over to some other stuff for a little bit. What other stuff have you been watching or reading or playing or anything?
Yeah, for sure. I finished Severance on Apple TV Plus. Really fucking cool show. And that might be an episode that we'll do in the future. We'll see. But yeah, it's really cool just to explore this reality where your work life and your personal life are separated in your head. So your work life, your work persona doesn't remember anything from your personal life, and your personal life, you don't remember anything from work. It was kind of an interesting experiment or thought experiment. And I feel like all of us can see ourselves a little bit in that show too.
Mm.
I started watching Andor. I've only seen the first episode so far, but it's very cool, and I'm glad that they're taking the time to explore a side of Star Wars that has not really been explored too deeply before.
Hmm.
We're always so focused on the Jedi and the Sith and those Force wielders, but there's billions of people in the galaxy and billions of species. So it's like,
Hmm.
thank God we're finally taking a little bit of time to shine a light on the little guy. So
Yeah.
excited to continue with that show. And I've also, because Great British Bake Off is back, of course. I'm watching that, and it's a fun. It's always just a fun show. It's kind of nice to, even though it is a little, you do feel the stress of the bakers, but it's kind of a nice way to just relax and unwind. And it's just fun because they all speak with these accents I'm not used to at all. So you get these great diversity of voices and
Hmm.
personalities on the show, which is always just a fun time.
Yeah.
Um, that's about it for me. Dylan, what have you been up to lately?
A bunch actually. So I finished Better Call Saul. Great show. I loved
Wow.
it. Yeah, I really powered through that. Um, and then continuing on with House of the Dragon and Rings of Power, which I'm enjoying both of them a lot.
Nice.
It's nice to have like two very different flavors of fantasy shows going at the same time. Um, I also watched Andor. I've watched all 3 episodes. I love it. I think it is, aside from Star Wars Visions, I think Andor is the most creatively interesting Star Wars has been since The Last Jedi. I think
Wow.
Lucasfilm
Mhm.
sort of pissed themselves a little bit after people got mad at The Last Jedi and have been not very creative in recent years. And this is a change of pace. Apparently, Tony Gilroy, the guy who is in charge of the show, doesn't give a shit about Star Wars at all.
Wow,
So
really?
yeah, so maybe that's what we need more of, creating Star Wars, because this show is so cool, man. I can't say too much because you're a couple episodes behind, but it's really good and it has something
Excellent.
to say. It is very explicit in its messaging, and it actually has like strong, transparent themes, which is really
Mhm.
cool. And I'm excited to see more. We have like 10 more episodes after what's been released, I think. So good for
Hot
that.
damn.
Yeah.
Nice.
And last thing I've been watching is the Cyberpunk Edge Runners, the anime spin-off from the Cyberpunk 2077 video game. I've only seen the first 2 episodes, but it's really cool so far. I like it.
Interesting. Hmm.
Yeah. But that's it from me. And we'll be back with another episode in about 2 weeks. About
Hell yeah.
it will be 2 weeks. About what we are not totally sure yet, but just tune back in. But until then, oh wait, leave a review on your podcast platform of choice if you would like and subscribe
Please.
on YouTube if you would like to do so. Share it with your friends if you know anybody who likes movie podcasts. And you can also check out any of our older episodes. They are all there on, I think, all the podcast platforms and YouTube. But
Nice.
until next time, where can people find you online, Niles?
People can follow me on Instagram at Niles Got No Styles. What about you, Dylan? Where can people follow you?
On Twitter at D-Day Movies, on Instagram at DylanD1026, on YouTube at D-Day Movies, and on Twitch at D-Day_movies. Thank you all so much for tuning in.
Yes.
Hope you liked the episode. Hope we handled this with the respect it deserved. Have a good one, everybody.
Yeah.
Peace.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.